Imagine you're overseeing the pouring of 1,000,000 tons of concrete,
Yeah.
right? Like building a state-of-the-art billion-dollar mega hospital right in the middle of Dubai.
Oh, massive scale. Just a colossal undertaking.
Exactly. And the engineering is flawless. I mean, the structural loads are calculated to the millimeter. But then 3 years into this mammoth project, your company just bleeds $50 million.
Right. Just vanishes.
Yeah, and you're pushed to the absolute brink of bankruptcy. And the crazy part is, it's not because the concrete failed. It's not because the steel buckled.
Let me guess. Paperwork.
Bingo. It's because a project manager who was, in the chaotic rush of dealing with some unexpected subterranean flood, filed a written delay notice 24 hours too late.
Wow. 24 hours.
Yeah. You lose the equivalent of mid-sized corporations' entire annual revenue over a technicality buried on, like, page 412 of a contract.
That is, I mean, unfortunately, that is the daily terrifying reality for thousands of construction professionals working in the Middle East right now.
It really is.
The physical building, it's governed by the undeniable laws of physics. But the project itself, the financial survival of everyone involved, that's governed by this entirely different, incredibly murky ecosystem.
A total ecosystem of human leverage, yeah.
Right. Leverage, bespoke amendments, and just highly aggressive legal maneuvering.
Well, welcome to this Deep Dives, everyone. Today, our mission is to basically pull back the curtain on that exact murky ecosystem. We're digging into a stack of highly technical construction contract analyses, legal commentary, and really deep industry research.
Specifically focused on the Gulf Cooperation Council region, right?
Right, the GCC. So we're talking about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. And we are going to unpack how a very specific, almost hidden legal principle, it's a Latin phrase called Contra Proferentem, is rapidly becoming this ultimate lifeline.
It really is a lifeline for contractors navigating this high-stakes world.
Definitely. And we really need to emphasize who this matters to, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you are a quantity surveyor, a QS sweating over cost variations on a site in Riyadh, or maybe a project manager trying to keep an airport expansion on schedule in Doha.
Or even a claims consultant fighting it out in arbitration.
Exactly. This is your daily battlefield. But honestly, even if you're just someone who is fascinated by how cities actually get built, like the hidden architecture of a city's skyline, this is a masterclass in how power and language intersect.
Yeah, because contracts aren't just, boring paperwork stuffed in a drawer somewhere.
No, they are the actual operating system of the project.
I really love that framing. The contract is the operating system. And just from what I'm reading in these sources, the operating system that's currently being installed in these GCC mega projects is fundamentally corrupted.
Corrupted is the perfect word for it.
But, to understand why contractors are desperately grasping for this Contra Proferentem lifeline, we really have to start at the baseline.
Right. We have to look at what the gold standard operating system was actually supposed to be before it got hacked.
Exactly. I mean, if I'm building a multi-billion-dollar mixed-use development, there's supposed to be a standardized international framework, right?
Yeah, the international construction industry has spent, the better part of a century developing that standard.
Okay, so what is it?
It's primarily governed by a suite of contracts published by International Federation of Consulting Engineers. They produce these famously color-coded books.
Right. I saw a lot about the red book and the yellow book in the research.
Exactly. You'll frequently hear about the FIDIC red book, which that's traditionally for projects where the employer provides the design, and then the FIDIC yellow book, which is used when the contractor provides the design.
Okay, that makes sense.
These documents, they're the product of decades of iteration. They were built to create a highly predictable, functional, commercial environment.
So what makes the FIDIC standard the holy grail, so to speak? Because when I read through the foundational principles of these books, the word that just keeps jumping out at me is balance.
Balance is exactly it.
It feels almost, inherently democratic in its approach to risk.
The core philosophy of a pure, unamended FIDIC contract is indeed this equitable, balanced allocation of risk. The guiding principle is actually quite elegant in its simplicity.
Which is what, exactly?
The principle is that risk should sit with the party who is best equipped to manage it, control it, or price it.
Right. That makes total logical sense.
It operates on this underlying assumption that both parties actually want the project to finish on time and on budget.
Let's try to ground that in a physical example for you guys listening. If I am the main contractor building, say, a massive residential tower, I control the labor on site, right?
Correct. You manage the workforce.
So if my crane operators go on strike or my concrete pourers are just being slow, I bear that risk.
Exactly, because you are the one who can actually do something about it.
Right. But if I am the employer, like the sovereign wealth fund or the private developer, I control the land itself. So if the municipal government suddenly revokes the zoning permit, or, I don't know, if we dig down and find out the land is heavily contaminated with toxic waste from a previous century, that risk sits with the employer.
That is the pure FIDIC machinery working perfectly right there. I mean, the contractor shouldn't be gambling on municipal zoning laws, right?
Yeah, that would be insane.
And the employer shouldn't have to micromanage crane operators. By assigning risk to the party who can actually mitigate it, you drastically reduce the need for these massive financial contingencies in the bids.
And I imagine you drastically reduce disputes, too.
Oh, hugely. You create clarity. But this brings us to the core tension of the entire industry today.
The reality check.
Exactly. Across the GCC market, that standard balanced risk allocation is essentially a ghost. It's a myth. Standard FIDIC forms are almost never adopted as is.
I found this part of our research absolutely wild. The employers mandate that the contractors use this global gold standard FIDI framework, but then they just completely gut it.
They absolutely gut it.
How do you even use a standard form while simultaneously destroying the standard?
Well, the mechanism of change lies in something called the particular conditions.
Okay, break that down for us.
So a standard FIDI contract comes with two main parts. First, you have the general conditions, which is that balanced boilerplate we just described.
Right, the fair rules.
But obviously, no two construction projects are identical. Building a hydroelectric dam in a mountain range is wildly different from building a skyscraper in a desert.
Yeah, totally different physical realities.
So FIDI provides a built-in mechanism to tailor the contract to a specific project,
Right.
and those are the particular conditions.
It's meant to be like a tweaking tool, right? A way to just say, hey, we need to adjust the working hours because of local noise ordinances.
That was the original intention, yeah. Just minor, necessary adjustments.
But that's not what's happening.
Not at all. What massive employers, government entities, and mega developers in the GCC have done is they've completely weaponized these particular conditions.
Weaponize how?
They don't use them to tweak. They use them to fundamentally alter, delete, or just completely overwrite the general conditions.
As wiping out the balanced rules.
Exactly. They draft these highly bespoke amendments that systematically strip away the contractor's protections, and they shift disproportionate commercial, legal, and operational risk completely away from themselves.
It's like the particular conditions act as a localized virus in the software of the contract.
That is a great analogy.
Like the basic FIDIC operating system looks completely fine on the desktop, right? It has the shiny FIDIC logo. But when you actually look at the code, this virus has silently rerouted all the payment approvals to a dead end and, like, disabled all the error warnings.
The industry actually refers to it as a Trojan horse contract.
Oh, a Trojan horse. That makes so much sense.
It retains the outward, respectable appearance of a standard form. So when an international contractor's board of directors, or maybe their lending bank, reviews the initial tender package, they see FIDI's Red Book on the cover.
Which gives them this massive false sense of security.
Exactly. But substantively, once you open the gates, roll the horse inside, and actually sign the dotted line, it operates as a highly aggressive, bespoke, employer-drafted agreement.
The equitable risk allocation has just been completely hollowed out.
Entirely gutted.
So we have this Trojan horse sitting in the middle of our hypothetical project site. Let's look at what is actually pouring out of it.
Let's do it.
If the mechanics of the contract are altered, what exactly are these employers changing under the hood? Like, what does an aggressively amended employer-biased GCC contract actually look like in practice for a QS or a PM?
Based on the vast array of contract analyses and legal commentaries we've reviewed, the mutation usually falls into three distinct categories. We can call them the three pillars of employer bias.
Okay, the three pillars. What's number one?
The first, and arguably the most lethal on a day-to-day basis, is the imposition of strict notice provisions as conditions precedent.
Condition precedent. Man, just the phrase sounds legally terminal.
It essentially is.
Break down how that actually works on a dusty, chaotic construction site.
Okay, under a standard balanced FIDI's contract, if a contractor is delayed by the employer, let's say the employer's design team fails to issue the finalized blueprints for the HVAC system on time, The contractor is legally entitled to an extension of time, an EOT.
Because it wasn't the contractor's fault.
Right. They are required to notify the employer of the delay, sure, but the standard form allows for some reasonable flexibility, recognizing that the primary goal is, actually building the building, not just filing paperwork.
But in the amended GCC versions, I'm guessing that flexibility is just erased?
Completely erased. Employers draft hyper-specific timeframes into the particular conditions.
How specific are we talking?
They dictate that if the contractor fails to submit a formal, highly detailed written notice within, say, 7 days, or in some really draconian contracts, 48 hours of the start of the delaying event, they suffer an automatic total loss of entitlement to claim that time.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm fully grasping the severity of this.
Yeah.
Let's go back to a hypothetical, like a massive metro extension. The contractor is digging the tunnel. They hit an unmapped, massive underground utility pipe that belongs to the employer.
Very common scenario.
And the employer's maps were just completely wrong. The tunnel boring machine has to stop. The project manager on site immediately gets on the phone, starts redirecting crews, calls in specialist engineers, and works like 48 hours straight to secure the site and stop a collapse.
Doing their jobs, basically.
Right. But because they were busy saving the physical project, they didn't draft a formal legal letter to the employer within that 48-hour window. Are you saying they lose the right to claim the delay, even though it is physically obvious to everyone on planet Earth that the employer caused the problem?
They lose the right entirely.
That is insane.
Under the legal theory of a condition precedent, procedural noncompliance strictly overrides substantive entitlement.
Wow.
The actual merit of the claim, the fact that the pipe was unmapped and it was the employer's fault, becomes entirely irrelevant in the eyes of that specific clause.
Just because of a late piece of paper?
If the notice is late, the contractor loses the right to claim the extra time. And because they are denied that extension of time, the project completion date remains unchanged.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep. When they inevitably finish late because of that pipe delay, the employer hits them with massive delay penalties known as liquidated damages.
So they are financially penalized for prioritizing the physical safety of the project over the bureaucratic paperwork of the contract.
Exactly.
The employer actively caused the problem, but the contractor pays the millions in damages because a letter was a day late. That is a completely toxic environment for a project team.
It creates a massive constant tension for the QSs and PMs on the ground. I mean, projects constantly evolve.
It's not a sterile laboratory.
Right. You have undocumented changes. You have quick verbal instructions given on site because the concrete trucks are lined up down the street and the pour has to happen right now.
Yeah, you can't just pause the concrete while you draft a letter.
Exactly. The employer's representative might be standing right there saying, hey, just pour it. We'll sort the paperwork out later.
Oh, I bet that happens all the time.
It does. But if the contractor's team follows that verbal instruction to keep the project moving without stopping to satisfy the exact procedural notice requirements of the amended contract, they are legally invalidating their legitimate claims for payment.
Which perfectly leads us to the second pillar of this weaponized rulebook.
The fall of the engineer.
Yeah. If the contractor is trapped by these microscopic notice windows, who is actually administering this trap? In the research, it sounded like a very sad chapter in construction history. Who is the engineer supposed to be?
In pure ICIDAC principles, the engineer, and that's usually capitalized in the text, is a defined, highly respected role. They are meant to be a neutral, independent contract administrator.
Like a referee.
Exactly. Historically, they were the absolute gods of the construction site. They evaluate claims fairly, they certify payments impartially, and they act as a technical referee between the employer and the contractor.
Okay, so if the contractor asks for an extension of time, the engineer looks at the facts objectively and makes a binding determination.
Right. They are the independent umpire calling balls and strikes.
But I'm assuming the Trojan horse changes that.
Oh, completely. In heavily amended GCC contracts, this role is systematically dismantled. The independence is entirely stripped away.
How so?
Through the particular conditions, the engineer is transformed from an impartial umpire into a captive representative of the employer.
The umpire is now on the employer's payroll, wearing their jersey and taking orders from their dugout.
And the power they are granted in that jersey is immense. The employer uses the bespoke amendments to grant themselves or their newly captive engineer sweeping unilateral rights.
Like what kind of rights?
We see contracts where the employer can suspend work indefinitely without compensating the contractor for the downtime.
Just pause the project and pay nothing.
Yep. We see unrestricted powers to order massive variations to the design without agreeing on the price first.
Build this extra wing, we'll figure out what it costs later.
Exactly. And most devastatingly, we see incredibly broad discretionary rights to simply reject contractor claims for additional time or money without having to provide a detailed objective justification.
I can see how that just completely breaks the psychological machinery of a project.
It destroys it.
If the person holding the purse strings, the person deciding if your company survives the month, is financially incentivized and legally bound to rule against you, the concept of a partnership is dead. You were in a Cold War from day one.
A Cold War is the perfect description for it. And the weaponry of that Cold War brings us to the third pillar.
Okay, pillar number 3.
Massive risk transfer without compensation.
Let's pull back to that pure FIDIC rule we established earlier. Risk sits with the party best equipped to manage it. I'm guessing these bespoke amendments take that rule, set it on fire, and throw it out the window.
They don't just throw it out, they reverse it entirely. Contractors are legally saddled with risks they have absolutely no physical or commercial control over.
And they can't price for it, right?
Crucially, yes. These are risks they cannot possibly price into their tender accurately.
Walk me through some functional examples of these unpriceable risks.
Yeah.
What are contractors being forced to swallow in these GCC bids?
The most glaring example is absolute unforeseen ground conditions.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, under a balanced contract, if a contractor starts excavating for a deep foundation and they hit a massive subterranean river or maybe a geological fault line that wasn't on any of the employer's geotechnical surveys, the employer bears that cost.
Because it's their land.
Exactly. It is their land, it is their survey, they hold the risk. But in amended GCC contracts, the wording is altered to say the contractor has inspected the site and accepts all risks of subsurface conditions, whether foreseeable or not.
Whether foreseeable or not.
The risk is transferred entirely.
How do you even put a price tag on the unknown? I mean, if you are bidding for a job and the contract says you pay for anything weird you find in the dirt, you can't accurately price that.
You really can't.
You either pad your bid with a $50 million contingency, in which case you will never be the cheapest bid and you will never win the job, or you just cross your fingers, bid aggressively, and pray the dirt is clean.
It forces contractors into a massive game of Russian roulette, and honestly, it doesn't stop at the ground. We see uncapped liquidated damages.
Let's define that for the listeners really quick. Liquidated damages, or LDs, those are the penalty you pay for every day you were late delivering the project, right?
Correct. Standard contracts cap these damages usually at around 10% of the total contract value.
Which still hurts a lot.
It hurts, but it gives the contractor a known worst-case scenario. Heavily amended contracts, though, they just remove the cap entirely.
Oh, wow.
The delay penalties could theoretically exceed the value of the entire company, bankrupting them completely.
That is terrifying.
We also see incredibly harsh fitness for purpose design obligations where the contractor practically guarantees the commercial success of the facility, and broad indemnity clauses.
It just keeps piling on.
But perhaps the most dangerous one, especially in the current global climate, is the total exclusion of price escalation claims.
Right, I wanted to dig into this one. A total exclusion of price escalation. Does that mean that if the cost of raw materials skyrockets globally, the contractor just has to eat the difference?
The contractor absorbs 100% of the inflation.
Are you kidding?
Think about the compounded danger of this during the recent periods of global supply chain disruption. We are talking about mega projects that take 4, 5, or 6 years to build.
Right, you're pricing stuff years in advance.
If a contractor signed a fixed-price contract in 2019 to build an airport, and then global events caused the price of structural steel to triple and shipping container costs to quadruple by 2021.
A balanced contract would account for that, right?
Yeah. A pure FDI contract has fluctuation clauses, mechanisms to adjust a baseline based on global indices.
Because it's nobody's fault. It's a macroeconomic event. No one controls the price of global steel.
Exactly. But an aggressively amended GCC contract explicitly deletes those fluctuation clauses. It basically looks the contractor in the eye and says, you signed a fixed lump sum price. We don't care if a global crisis made steel unobtainable. Find a way to buy it, ship it, and build it, or we will crush you with uncapped liquidated damages for being late.
Okay, I have to stop you here. I am sitting here processing this, and my mind is just reeling.
It's a lot to take in.
The employer takes no risk for their own land, no risk for global inflation. They buy out the independent umpire, and they hide behind 48-hour trapdoors to deny legitimate claims. This isn't a negotiation, it's a hostage situation.
That's how it feels to the people on the ground.
Why would any rational multinational contracting business sign a document like this? Why doesn't the entire contracting industry just collectively stand up and say, no thanks, we won't build your gleaming new skyline under these suicidal terms?
It is the defining question of the industry, truly. To understand why they keep signing the Trojan horse, we have to pull the lens back from the legal text and look at the macro commercial realities of the GCC construction supply chain.
Okay, let's look at the macro. What's driving this?
The primary driver of this behavior is severe market oversupply.
So, too many builders chasing too few buildings.
Exactly that. The GCC is a hub for the world's most ambitious infrastructure. But there is a massive concentrated pool of highly capable international and regional contractors, all fiercely competing for a relatively limited number of high-value, high-prestige mega projects.
But the competition is just cutthroat.
Beyond cutthroat. If a sovereign wealth fund announces a $2 billion hospital project, you might have 10 world-class contractors bidding for it.
And they all need the work.
Desperately. These contractors have massive overheads. They have camps housing thousands of laborers. They have fleets of heavy machinery. They have entire floors of expensive engineers. They need cash flow to feed the beast.
When you are desperate to keep your people employed and your lights on, your bargaining power just evaporates. It becomes a race to the bottom.
A vicious race to the bottom. And this desperation collides with a very specific entrenched procurement culture within many public and quasi-government entities in the region.
What's the culture?
The procurement teams inside these employer organizations are often evaluated internally, and they receive their bonuses, not on how smoothly or collaboratively a project runs over 5 years, but on how much theoretical legal liability they manage to push away from the employer during the 60-day tender negotiation phase.
Oh, wow. So it's a purely metric-driven exercise for them.
Entirely.
The procurement manager basically has a checklist. Did we shift 100% of the ground risk to the contractor?
Yeah.
Yes. Did we uncap the delay damages? Yes. Brilliant. We protected the client. They are optimizing for a spreadsheet, not an actual construction site.
You nailed it. And this intense focus on risk shedding leads to another incredibly destructive phenomenon in the region: cut and paste drafting.
I can guess what this is based on everything we've discussed. It's like a lawyer or a procurement officer taking the harshest possible clauses they can find from past projects and just Frankensteining them together.
That is precisely the mechanism. A legal advisor will look at their database and pull the bespoke, incredibly harsh amendments that were specifically written for, say, a highly complex, high-risk offshore marine project, where perhaps strict liability made some sense.
Right, because building underwater is genuinely riskier.
Exactly. But then they lazily cut and paste them into the contract for a standard, straightforward commercial office tower in the middle of a city.
Just dragging and dropping the trauma.
They do not evaluate the specific, localized risks of the new site. They just copy the most aggressive, heavily armored language they have on file, assuming more armor is always better.
So the executives of the contracting firm are presented with this Frankenstein contract during the tender phase. They know it's toxic, right?
Usually, yes. Their legal teams flag it.
But they look at their massive overhead, they look at their competitors circling the project, and they decide to sign it blindly just to get their foot in the door. They prioritize immediate survival over long-term contractual safety.
They sign it, they pop the champagne in the boardroom because they secured a $1 billion order book, and then they hand the radioactive file down to the project team.
And that's where the nightmare begins.
The tragedy here is entirely borne by the professionals on the ground. The project managers and the quantity surveyors only truly discover the depth of the trap months later.
Right, when the first shovel hits that buried pipe we talked about.
Exactly. When the dispute erupts on site, the QS submits the claim for the extra costs, and the employer's captive engineer sends back a one-line rejection, citing a clause buried on page 300 that the executives just waved away during the tender.
And the really insidious part about this, and I saw this heavily emphasized in the research, is that this toxic risk doesn't just stop at the main contractor level. It rolls downhill, gaining momentum.
It absolutely cascades.
Because the main contractor doesn't build a billion-dollar hospital alone. They hire dozens of specialized subcontractors.
The main contractor is really just an immense management vehicle. The actual physical work is done by the mechanical and electrical engineers, the facade specialists, the elevator installers, the concrete pouring companies.
So what happens to them?
Well, when the main contractor is forced by the market to swallow these draconian employer-biased terms, Their immediate survival instinct kicks in. They turn around and draft even harsher obligations for their own subcontractors.
We're talking about back-to-back contracts.
Exactly.
The philosophy of whatever pain the employer inflicts on me, I'm going to legally mandate that I can automatically inflict it on you.
And they usually add a little extra margin of risk transfer just to insulate themselves further.
Unbelievable.
So the smallest, most specialized, and most financially vulnerable companies at the very bottom of the supply chain, the ones with the thinnest margins and the least cash reserves, they end up inheriting the most concentrated, distilled form of this risk.
It creates a completely fragile, highly pressurized house of cards.
Yes. When the employer squeezes the main contractor over a late notice, the main contractor squeezes the subcontractor, and the subcontractor simply goes bankrupt, halting the work entirely.
So we have set the stage perfectly here. The executive signed a suicidal deal, the massive risk cascaded down to the most vulnerable players, the umpire on site is rigged, and inevitably, as always happens in construction, a massive dispute blows up.
It always does.
The contractor is bleeding millions in unapproved variations. They've been denied an extension of time because they missed a 48-hour window, and they finally decide they cannot survive without fighting back.
They lawyer up.
And they prepare to enter the courtroom or the arbitration tribunal. But here is where this deep dive takes a massive left turn. Because in the GCC, the legal battlefield operates under rules that are going to completely upend the expectations of anyone used to Western legal systems.
It is a profound structural clash of legal worlds. And understanding this clash is exactly how we locate the lifeline for the contractor.
Tell us about the clash.
We have a massive, glaring contradiction sitting at the very heart of these mega projects. The FEA contracts themselves, even when heavily amended and mutilated by employers, are fundamentally drafted in a British-style common law format.
Let's define the battle lines here. For anyone not versed in global legal systems, what does common law drafting actually mean when you are standing in front of a tribunal?
Common law drafting, which obviously originated in the English court system, relies heavily on the strict, literal interpretation of the text.
Just the words on the page.
Yes. The philosophy is that commercial parties are sophisticated adults, and the words they chose to put on the page are absolute. The contract is king.
Okay.
If the contract explicitly says the contractor must notify the employer within 48 hours, otherwise all rights are forever waived, and you notify them at hour 49 under strict common law literalism, you lose.
The judge doesn't care if it's unfair.
The judge doesn't care if it's unfair. The judge cares what the ink says.
The text is the only truth. But here's the massive twist in the research. Most GCC states, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, do not operate under a common law system.
They absolutely do not.
When that dispute goes to arbitration in Dubai or Riyadh, the tribunal isn't applying English law.
They operate under civil law systems, and the legal DNA of these jurisdictions is entirely different.
Where does it come from?
The civil codes in the GCC are heavily influenced by a combination of Islamic jurisprudence, the Sharia, and codified civil systems that were based on historical Egyptian and French models.
So we have a fiercely strict, literal British-style contract being enforced by a Middle Eastern civil law arbitrator.
Yes.
How does that civil law system approach contract differently? Like, what are the overarching rules?
Civil codes in the GCC prioritize mandatory, overarching, and statutory principles that parties cannot simply contract out of, no matter what they sign.
Wait, you can't contract out of them?
No. The most critical of these is the obligation of good faith.
Good faith.
Yes. The civil codes mandate that contracts must be performed in accordance with their contents, but crucially, in a manner consistent with the requirements of good faith.
Okay, that's fascinating.
They also empower tribunals to prevent the abuse of rights, to prevent unjust enrichment, and they grant incredibly broad judicial discretion to the judge or arbitrator to look beyond the literal words on the page to find the equitable truth of the situation.
Wait, I really want to challenge this because it sounds almost too good to be true for a desperate contract.
No, it does.
Are you telling me that a highly sophisticated multinational contractor can sign a contract that explicitly says, in plain English, the contractor gets absolutely no time extension for any reason, and a civil law arbitrator in the UAE can look at that plain text and say, no, I am ignoring that clause because it's not fair?
Well,
isn't that just tearing up the sanctity of a contract? How does an arbitrator decide when to invoke this power?
it's a crucial distinction to make. They do not just tear up contracts on a whim, and it is definitely not a free pass for bad contractor management.
Right. You can't just be incompetent and cry unfair.
Exactly. The starting point for any civil law tribunal is always the text of the contract. Pacta sunt servanda agreements must be kept. But the tribunal has the statutory authority to intervene if enforcing a specific draconian clause constitutes a severe abuse of rights.
Give me a real scenario where that intervention happens.
Okay, let's go back to our condition precedent notice clause. The 48-hour trap.
Yeah, the buried pipe.
Suppose the employer actively caused the delay by, say, physically denying the contractor access to the site. Then the employer actively distracted the contractor by demanding emergency mitigation plans.
Give us a plan right now.
Exactly. When the contractor finally files the claim, the employer points to the 48-hour notice window they drafted and says, "You're late, claim denied, and now you owe us millions in penalties."
Which, under common law, they might get away with.
In a strict common law court, the employer might win that. But a GCC civil law tribunal can look at that and say, you, the employer, caused the delay, and you are now using a procedural trap you drafted to financially ruin the contractor and enrich yourself.
You're weaponizing the paperwork.
Right. That is a bad faith application of the contract. It violates the mandatory principle of good faith under the Civil Code. The tribunal can effectively bypass or refuse to enforce that excessively one-sided provision.
So the literal words are not always the final answer. The conduct of the parties matters just as much as the text.
Conduct is huge in civil law.
And that exact mechanism, the question of how tribunals resolve these harsh, ambiguous, and heavily mutated employer amendments, finally brings us to the titular star of our deep dive.
Here we go.
This is the precise moment where the doctrine of Contra Proferentem steps onto the battlefield.
It is the ultimate legal tiebreaker.
Let's define this clearly and practically for the listeners. What exactly is the Contra Proferentem rule?
Contra Proferentem is a fundamental principle of contractual interpretation. Translated from Latin, it roughly means against the offerer.
Against the offer.
Yeah, good. It dictates a very specific rule for a judge or arbitrator. If a clause in a contract is genuinely ambiguous, meaning the wording is muddy, contradictory, or capable of more than one reasonable interpretation, the legal tribunal must interpret that clause against the party that originally drafted it or the party that insisted on its inclusion.
So if you wrote the confusing rule, the confusion is weaponized against you.
Exactly. The logic is deeply rooted in preventing the abuse of unequal bargaining power.
Because the drafter had all the power.
Right. The legal philosophy is that the party holding the party with the immense commercial leverage to dictate the terms to a desperate contractor has a fundamental duty to be clear.
That makes perfect sense.
If the employer chooses to use dense, muddy, cut-and-paste language to try and create traps for the weaker party, the law will not reward them for their lack of clarity. If there are two ways to read a sentence, the tribunal will choose the reading that hurts the drafter.
I love the mechanics of this. It's like legal judo.
It really is.
The contractor is using the employer's own weight, their own aggressive complexity, against them. So let's apply this directly to the GCC reality we've built up. We established earlier that employers and their procurement teams are exclusively the ones drafting these bespoke, cut-and-paste particular conditions.
Because the employers are the sole authors of these harsh amendments, the doctrine of Contra Proferentem effectively turns their aggressive drafting into their greatest vulnerability in a civil law arbitration.
We see this doctrine deployed constantly in the research to dismantle those ambiguous notice conditions precedent, right?
All the time.
Walk me through a live-fire example. How does a contractor's lawyer actually use this to save a claim?
Let's look at a classic, poorly drafted employer amendment. The bespoke clause says, the contractor must give formal written notice of any delay as soon as practicable, but in no event later than 14 days from the commencement of the delaying event. Otherwise, all rights are forever waived.
I mean, it sounds brutally clear. 14 days or you die.
It sounds clear until you hit the reality of a complex project. What defines the commencement of the event?
Oh, I see.
Imagine the delay isn't a sudden pipe burst, but a slow, creeping change in local import regulations that gradually starves the site of materials over 3 months. When exactly did that event commence?
That's a great question. Day one of the rumor. Day one of the law passing.
Exactly. If the employer rejects the claim, arguing the event commenced on day one of the new regulations, and the contractor is therefore months out of time, the contractor's lawyer will pounce on that.
They will argue the clause is fundamentally ambiguous regarding ongoing or cumulative events.
Exactly. The lawyer points out that the employer drafted a clause suitable for a discrete, single-day event, but tried to apply it to a continuous, creeping delay.
Because they just cut and pasted it.
Right. Because the phrase commencement of the event is capable of multiple reasonable interpretations in this context, the tribunal invokes Contra Proferentem.
And what's the result?
They interpret the ambiguity against the employer who drafted it. They rule that the notice period didn't trigger until the full impact of the regulations was known, and they allow the contractor's multi-million-dollar claim to proceed.
Wow. So the deeply practical, actionable advice here for the quantity surveyors and project managers listening in their site offices isn't just a complaint about how unfair the contract is.
Complaining gets you nowhere.
The tactical advice is to meticulously hunt for the ambiguity in those lazy cut-and-paste employer amendments. That ambiguity is literally your shield.
You have to become a forensic reader of your own contract. You look for it in the limitation of liability caps. Are they worded vaguely regarding gross negligence? You look for it in murky extension of time wording. You look for it in contradictory precedence clauses.
What is a precedence clause? I don't think we covered that.
It is a clause that dictates which document wins if there is a conflict.
Oh, because these contracts are thousands of pages long.
Exactly. When an employer cuts and pastes from 5 different old projects, they often create massive internal contradictions. The main contract might say the employer's technical requirements override the contractor's design proposal, but a deeply buried schedule in the appendices might say the exact opposite.
And when those collide?
When those two clauses collide, it creates ultimate ambiguity, and Contra Proferentem dictates the arbitrator must rule against the employer who created the mess.
It's poetic justice, honestly. But I feel like we need to add a massive warning label here. I can imagine a QS listening to this, running back to the office, finding a clause they don't like, and immediately yelling, Contra Proferentem, to the employee.
Yeah, please don't do that. That is a vital caveat. I must stress this for the professionals listening. Contra Proferentem is a secondary principle of interpretation. It is a tool of last resort.
So you can't just use it whenever you want.
You cannot simply manufacture ambiguity because a clause is commercially harsh. If the clause is brutal but perfectly, undeniably clear, Contra Proferentem cannot save you.
The arbitrator will try to figure out what the contract actually meant to say first, using normal tools, right?
Yes. A tribunal will first look at the ordinary, plain meaning of the wording. They will look at the commercial context of the project, the overall purpose of the contract, standard industry practice, and those overarching civil law principles of good faith we discussed.
They do the homework first.
They will make every effort to cure the ambiguity and find the true intent of the parties. It is only if genuine, unresolvable ambiguity remains after all that analytical heavy lifting that Contra Proferentem strikes, acting as the final, fatal tiebreaker against the drafter.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the whole battlefield. We have this incredibly harsh landscape of aggressive employer bias and mutated FIDI contracts.
Right.
But we also have this growing, powerful lifeline of GCC, civil law fairness, and Contra Proferentem pushing back against the worst of it in arbitration. What does this tension mean for the future of building in the region? Are we just locked in this endless, exhausting cycle of aggressive drafting on the front end and incredibly expensive litigation on the back end?
Well, there are genuine signs of a shifting landscape. The long-term systemic consequences of this excessive, unbalanced contractual risk are finally being recognized. And importantly, they're being recognized by the people who hold the ultimate purse strings.
We're not talking about the procurement managers anymore. We're talking about the capital.
We are talking about the major international lenders, the global banks, the massive sovereign wealth funds, the international institutional investors who are actually financing these $20 billion mega projects. For a long time, they let procurement teams run wild. But now, these lenders are getting very, very nervous about this culture of aggressive risk dumping.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second. Why would a bank care?
Because of the fallout.
But if the developer effectively forces the contractor to guarantee the price, guarantee the time, and absorb all the risk of inflation and ground conditions, doesn't that perfectly protect the bank's investment? I would think lenders would love these ironclad, aggressive contracts.
You'd think so, and that was exactly the prevailing theory for a decade. But the hard data of the last few years proves otherwise. The lenders are finally realizing a fundamental truth of construction economics.
Which is?
When you dump all of a project's risk onto a contractor who mathematically cannot afford to bear it, the contractor doesn't magically absorb the risk.
They just break under the weight of it.
Exactly. They go bankrupt mid-project. Or they simply demobilize and stop work because they are bleeding cash. Or they initiate a 5-year scorched earth arbitration that halts construction entirely.
And a half-finished rusting hospital in the desert generates absolutely zero revenue for the bank that financed it.
The illusion of risk transfer actually created a much larger risk of total project failure.
Wow, that's a paradigm shift.
Precisely. The power players are realizing that trying to cheat the system is costing them exponentially more in legal fees, massive completion delays, and distressed non-performing assets.
So what are the lenders doing about it?
These lenders are now utilizing their immense leverage to push for a return to clearer drafting and a more balanced, sustainable risk allocation. They are pushing the market back toward the pure FID principles.
And how is that playing out practically? Are they just asking nicely for nicer contracts?
No, they are mandating structural changes. For example, they are heavily pushing for collaborative contract administration and the mandatory use of DA.
DABs. I saw that acronym repeatedly in the research. What is a DA functionally?
Dispute Avoidance and Adjudication Boards. It is a panel of independent, highly experienced industry experts, usually 3 of them, appointed at the very start of the project, paid for equally by both sides.
Okay.
Instead of waiting 3 years for a delayed notice dispute to fester into a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, the DAB visits the construction site regularly. They wear hard hats, they walk the site, they look at the delayed concrete pour, and they drink coffee with the project teams.
It sounds like bringing the neutral, independent engineer back to life, but as a committee.
That is exactly what it is. They spot the tension early. If there is an argument over a subterranean river, the DAB steps in within weeks, issues a binding or interim decision, and keeps the cash flowing and the project moving before it becomes a legal war.
That sounds incredibly optimistic. But we have to ground this in the reality of today. Is the GCC construction market actually transforming into this collaborative utopia?
I have to weigh this optimism against the harsh present reality. Despite these pushes from international lenders and the growing awareness of doctrines like Contra Proferentem, the heavily amended, aggressively employer-favored contract remains the absolute dominant, widespread reality across the GCC today.
So if I bid tomorrow?
If you are tendering for a project tomorrow in Dubai or Riyadh, you are almost certainly going to face a Trojan horse.
It is incredibly hard to break old habits, especially when those habits make procurement managers and aggressive legal advisors feel powerful and safe.
It is institutional inertia. The transition back to collaborative, balanced principles will be a very slow, very painful cultural shift. It requires retraining an entire generation of the industry to realize that fair, balanced contracts actually build complex projects significantly faster and cheaper than weaponized ones.
So to summarize this incredible evolution we've tracked today, we started decades ago with the standard balanced FIDIC forms. They were equitable, designed to match risk with control. Then, as the GCC market exploded and competition reached a fever pitch, those forms mutated into these Frankenstein employer-biased contracts. The Trojan horses, filled with microscopic notice traps, captive engineers, and unpriceable risk transfers.
The dark ages of drafting.
But the quest for maximum risk transfer ultimately defeated itself. It created unbuildable projects. And now, because of the safety nets provided by GCC civil law fairness and the ultimate tie-breaking power of Contra Proferentem punishing lazy, aggressive drafting, the industry is slowly, painfully waking up to the fact that aggressively weaponizing the rulebook just blows up the project.
That is a masterful synthesis of the journey. The legal doctrines had to step in to catch the pieces when the commercial market pushed risk transfer past the breaking point.
This has been absolutely eye-opening. We took something that seemed like the driest, most impenetrable legal text of the particular conditions of a construction contract and found the actual high-stakes battleground underneath it.
It really is a battleground.
To our listeners, whether you are managing a concrete pour in Dubai, calculating quantities in Riyadh, or just interested in how the world gets built, I hope this gives you a completely new lens to look at the paperwork that governs your reality.
The ultimate takeaway for the professionals on the ground: read your contracts thoroughly, understand your notice periods, and always, always look for the ambiguity.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that really struck me during our deep dive today. Think about risk in a construction project the same way we think about energy in physics.
Oh, I like this.
The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred or changed from one form to another. Risk is exactly the same. So when a massive developer aggressively drafts a contract to dump 100% of the project's risk onto a contractor who cannot possibly afford to bear it, does the developer actually shed that risk?
No, they just hide it.
Or do they just guarantee a massive project-killing dispute 3 years down the line? In the end, does winning the contract negotiation actually mean losing the project? Keep questioning the paperwork, and we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.